Sure. Okay. Good morning. Morning to the Angelman community. Good morning, Amit. Good morning, Eileen. We're here this morning for Ovid to discuss their top-line data from their clinical trial on OV101 in and adolescents. We have Dr. Amit Rakit here, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Ovid. Recently, Ovid put out a press release talking about their top-line data, and we know the community had a lot of questions specifically around what it was that Ovid saw as far as clinical outcome measures, the CGI, what that means, what its relevance is in the clinical setting. So Dr. Rakit, we're going to hand it off to you, and you can address the community directly.
Great. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Eileen. And thanks to the community. It's a pleasure being with you guys again. We've done a couple of these webcasts in the past. So first of all, I just want to thank the community for the overwhelming support that we felt from you in actually supporting our work here at Ovid, as well as the extraordinary efforts of those of you who participated in the STARS study. As Paula mentioned, we released information about the STARS data just a short time ago, and just wanted to have this opportunity to address any questions from the community, as well as go through some of the data if you had any specific questions, and feel free to follow up if I don't address those with either ourselves at Ovid or of course through Paula and Eileen. But first of all, let me just start off saying the STARS study was one of the first of its kind from an industry-sponsored perspective. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. That means it's a big mouthful, but it was basically designed to really look at that question of whether a specific compound, what we have, OV101, will be beneficial in people who have Angelman syndrome. And the STARS study, it lasted about 2 years, as you know, and it was a great journey. We started with adults, as you remember, and then we were able to expand the population to adolescents as well. And so ultimately, while we had planned to enroll 75 people with Angelman syndrome, we over-enrolled due to the enthusiasm of the community. And so we had 88 people who were enrolled in this study, and the study lasted 12 weeks, so it was 3 months of the study. A couple of things about the study itself. I'll tell you, we looked at, it was a safety and tolerability study. We were looking at safety and tolerability of OV101 in people with Angelman syndrome as its primary endpoint, so the primary reason that we were conducting the study. However, we were also looking at several exploratory endpoints that we were interested in because they were important to a person with Angelman syndrome and the manifestations of this condition. So things like overall symptoms, which was measured by something called the CGI, which I'll talk about in a little bit, as well as behavior, which we looked at scales that have been established in the past, not specifically for Angelman syndrome, but scales that have been used in the past in other conditions. One specifically the ABC, which is the Aberrant Behavior Checklist, and the ADAMS, which is the Anxiety, Depression, and Mood score. We also looked at sleep by a sleep diary. We also looked at gait by something called the MPOMA, which is the Performance Orientation Mobility Assessment. And then, of course, we had some interesting gadgets, if you could participate in. But we looked at sleep with a watch, an Actor watch, as well as a walkway that you actually walked across to measure gait. So there was a couple of different exploratory endpoints that we were very interested in as well. Let me go back to our results then, just because I know we're short on time and I want to address the questions that have come up. We met our primary endpoint. So the primary endpoint for the study was safety and tolerability. And we had a very favorable safety profile, which is very consistent with the previous safety information that we had with OV101. As some of you remember, and if you don't, just remember that OV101 was tested in the past with people with insomnia or sleep disorder. And so there was more than what we call 1,000 patient years of safety information. So a lot of patients who actually had taken OV101 over a period of time that actually gave us a very robust database about safety. And the safety profile that we found with OV101 was very consistent with its previous known safety profile. So there were incidents of nausea, vomiting, and in this particular study, we did see some instances of rash, fever, and viral illness. And those you could potentially say that they were related together. Those were some of the findings that we found in the overall safety. But overall, we found that to be very favorable in terms of OV101. There were some additional pieces that we saw. As you remember, this study had 3 arms. There was a placebo arm, which was basically sugar pill. There was a once-a-day arm of OV101, and there was a twice-a-day arm of OV101. In the study with the once-a-day and twice-a-day arm, especially the twice-a-day arm, we saw some seizure activity, very minimal, but it was more than the placebo activity. You probably saw that in the press release. So that, just to let people know, everybody who came into the study, about 90% had a previous history of seizure activity and were on multiple anti-epileptic medications. There were no new seizures, so there was no new seizures in a person who had not had seizures before. So that's something we're looking into a little bit more, and it does help us understand maybe which dose is most effective. So that's kind of overall the safety information. Let me talk a little bit about the efficacy, because that's where some of the questions have really come in. So when we looked at the study, I mentioned several different endpoints that we were looking at. When you do a study that's for the industry, especially if we're looking for ultimately to go and speak to regulatory authorities about next steps, we want to make these studies as most robust as possible. And one of the things that we've done with this study is pre-specify how we look at the endpoints. And I just mentioned this because it's a very unique statistical methodology that's often used in large phase 3 studies. But we actually implemented this kind of statistical methodology in our study because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just finding a observation by chance. And if you look at things often enough, by the rules of statistics, you'll likely find something just by chance. If you flipped a coin 100 times, there's a 50% chance that you would get heads, 50% chance you'd get tails, so you'd expect 50-50. But some fluke might be that your numbers might be different, and you'll be 60 times you get heads versus the 50 that you would expect. So if you do things often enough, by chance, you may get something that's an observation. And in order to correct for that, what we do is we pre-specify what we're going to look at. And what that means is you say what's most important to you first, and then what's important second, third, fourth, and so on. And with the statistical rules, when you look for what's called statistical significance, that this is something not happening by chance, or it looks like it's clinically meaningful, or something that's statistically meaningful, we order these. So if you hit the first pre-specified endpoint, you can move on to the second. And then the third, if they continue to be statistically significant. Once they're not significant anymore, and there's some methodology around that, you can't go on. So it's very important. I mentioned this because the first statistical endpoint that we had in our, what's called a hierarchy, was the CGI, which is the Clinical Global Impressions, and specifically CGI-I, which is improvement. So let me talk to you a little bit about this endpoint first. So the CGI-I is performed by a clinician, so it's in the clinic, in the office. And with this study, we did this at 6 weeks and 12 weeks. There's no real baseline measure for the CGI-I. And what it measures is an overall symptom score, let's say overall symptoms. And it could mean different things for different people. So it's based on the individual. So at 6 weeks, and then again at 12 weeks, the clinician will do their own assessment, but then also will ask the caregiver, the parent, caregiver, family, about have you seen any changes, and can you describe them, and describe them. So the CGI is scaled on a point system of 1 to 7, with 4 being no change at all, 5, 6, and 7 being getting worse, so worse, much worse, or very much worse, and 1, 2, and 3 getting better. So if you back off from 4, 3 is improved, 2 is much improved, 1 is very much improved. And so that's what's actually measured by the CGI. So it could mean different things to different people. And I'll say one individual, for example, may say, look, my child is less anxious when they go to the restaurant and is able to be with the family more with less anxiety, and also may sleep a little bit better. Another person might say, well, they're more aware of their surroundings, so they don't open the oven door and when something's inside and cooking and try to grab something. And maybe also seems to be less hand flapping. Another person might say, it seems like there was additional communication that I was able to respond and express my thoughts, and I seemed that my child was actually more responsive than before. So it could mean different things to different people. So that's one thing. So it's very individual based. And then the score is done at 6 weeks and at 12 weeks. And so these scores are 1 through 7. And what we found with this study, that there was a significant improvement, statistically significant improvement in those people who were on OV101 versus those who were on placebo. And one thing that we look at is the overall activity versus the active compounds, OV101 versus placebo. And that's something that we're looking into further. But when people ask, what is actually the improvement, it varies by individual. And so that's why it's called the total symptom score. So total symptoms, it's an impression of the overall. Let me just stop there for a second. I'll just mention the other scales, like the ABC and ADAMS, the sleep diary, as well as the MCOMA, did not show significance from a statistical perspective. And that's why once they were all the others will not become statistically significant in the hierarchy, as I mentioned before. So we are still looking into and deep diving into the information we have around, for example, sleep, around EEGs, as you know that we took EEGs, around some of the other measures such as anxiety and behavior. But right now we're really focused on the CGI because that gives us the overall impression in the totality of symptoms that somebody with Angelman syndrome might have. Let me stop there for a second. I know I went through that a little quickly, but Paula, Eileen, any thoughts or any questions that you've had from the community?
I think that does a really good job of explaining what the CGI is, which I think a lot of people had questions about. And I know we're racing against the clock here to cover as much as we can. So I think maybe can we address some of the questions that the community had? Specifically, and trying to cover a lot of the questions maybe in one would be, what are the next steps that Ovid's looking at regarding OV101? Great,
that's a great question. We are really excited about this information, this new data. This is the first time that a compound, at least in the industry perspective, has shown such a significant, statistically significant signal on the CGI. And also, we're very excited with the community about what the potential for OV101 might be in this space, in looking at potential treatment options. So our next step right now is to actually have a conversation with the regulators. So the regulators in the US, of course, would be the FDA. We're not right now planning to go in Europe yet, but that's something that's in the future. But right now our focus is preparing the data that we currently have and pulling together all the information that we've collected from the STAR study, as well as some of the other information that we have from supporting some of the natural history work, some of the other work that's going on in parallel with the STAR study, to really pull together a perspective on this information, which we're very excited about, and have a conversation with FDA about what are next steps for a potential registrational path. So that's what we're working on now. We expect to have that conversation with the FDA before the end of the year, and that will really inform what that next step might be.
Okay, thank you, Amit. Appreciate that very, very much. I think the video or your audio cut out when you were talking just a little bit about the measures and statistical significance for the behavior and sleep in the gait. So maybe just as a follow-up question for that, I know you want to tease out more data there. Could you, so I think families are probably wondering, did we not see any improvement in those areas? And I know you addressed the hierarchy, but maybe could you just explain that just a little bit more?
Sure. So I'll try not, I'll just speak slower maybe. We did not see a statistically significant signal in those measures which I mentioned before. The ABC scale, the Adams scale, the sleep diary, and the MPOMA. However, we do see within the CGI potentially these signals around behavior, around sleep, and so we're teasing that data out a little bit more. One of the things to remember is that the ABC and Adams and some of these other scales were not specifically tailored for people with Angelman syndrome. For example, the ABC has 4 questions about inappropriate speech. And if your child maybe does not have a large vocabulary, as many children with Angelman syndrome don't, that question automatically you don't score very high and potentially 0. So there are some reasons why we believe some of these scales did not show statistical significance because they may not have been appropriate for the audience. However, they were the best scales we had at the time when we designed the studies. We looked at over 200 different measures or tools that pediatricians and neurologists use, and we narrowed it down to the ones that were used in the study, and knowing that they weren't ideal. The CGI, I'll just mention also, has been used more in the research community, specifically for neurology and psychiatry trials in the past.
I'm just going to give a plug to the community effort to identify appropriate outcome measurements for this patient population. I'm sure everybody now has heard of the Angelman Biomarker and Outcome Measure initiative. That is a joint initiative between FAST and the ASF. And what Amit just explained shows why it is critical that we have everyone's attention when it comes to developing outcome measures that are appropriate for our children, for children with Angelman syndrome. So please join that global registry. I'm gonna get that pushed. So Amit, can you speak about the open label extension trial? I think people are interested in that for those participants who were part of the trial. And then what about the portion of the population that has not yet participated in Ovid 101 trials? Is there something coming up that they would be able to participate in, or when they would be able to get this particular medication for their child if they're interested in doing so?
Great questions. So let me start with the open label extension study that is the follow-on for anybody who's actually participated in a previous Ovid 101 study in Angelman syndrome. So this includes the STAR study, as well as those people who participated on our PK study in the past, the PK adolescent study that was done about a year and a half ago as well. So anybody who completed the study and didn't drop out for a safety issue or a tolerability issue is eligible or will be eligible to roll over into the open label extension study. It's called ELARA. ELARA has not started yet, ELARA. But we are in the process of looking at when we can open that. These will likely occur in the same places, in the same sites that were participated in STARS, maybe some additional changes there as well. So we are anticipating that we will open that study before the end of the year. If you did participate in STARS, it doesn't matter which arm you were in, whether it was placebo, open label, placebo once a day or twice a day. You'll roll into this open label study, which will likely be the once-a-day dose, which we found to be effective in the STARS study. And so that study is, again, starting before the end of the year. We'll have more details out to the community as soon as that's done, but it's well on its way to starting, and we're already engaging with the different investigators at your clinical sites. So if you do have questions about the study, reach out to your site coordinators. They should have a little bit more information, and we'll be posting more information soon. In terms of other studies, so first of all, we'd like to have this discussion with the FDA, which we also anticipate before the end of the year, to fine-tune what we'd like to do additionally, if anything, in terms of the registrational process. But then also, we do want to address younger populations. And so we're looking at ways to involve the community that have not been part of the STARS study, which was adolescents and adults. And we'll be having further clarification and guidance once we have our discussions with the FDA. And there's a third question. So about when will it be available for people who either did not participate in any of the trials, or so that is also dependent on what our registrational path is. So for compounds in drug development, before marketing or being able to have a medicine largely publicly available, it does have to go through a regulatory process. In the US, it's the FDA. In Europe, it's the EMA and Food Solutions Team. And there's other regulatory bodies around the world that manage kind of approvals of medicines. So we are going to have those discussions as soon as possible. Very excited about the information that we do have, and that will help guide us in terms of what the next steps are. And then as soon as we know that, we will be able to communicate that to the community. So probably before the end of the year, you'll hear something from us again.
And I'm going to ask another question. If you do go into a pediatric population with OV101 in a trial, will you strongly consider CBD being a disqualifying factor, because so many of our younger patients are on some form of a CBD oil?
Yep, so that's a great question. So CBT and likely will be approved, as you know, in some of the, at least in the epilepsy space, and so some people will be on CBD. We are considering that for at least the open label study that we're going to be launching, which I mentioned to Lara. The pediatric study, it really depends, and if we what kind of study we need in younger populations, if any. That really depends on our regulatory discussions before we make that consideration. But that's definitely something we're aware of. We want to make it as easy as possible to participate. And so definitely it's something, but I don't have further details on that yet.
Eileen, any other questions for Amit?
There was one question about genotype and ages. So were we able to see any specific changes based on genotype, and did you see better effect of the medication in different age, the adult versus the adolescent population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we enrolled 88 people with Angelman syndrome in the STARS study. 66 were adults above 18, and less than the adolescents were 22. It's a smaller group, but there's definitely a trend towards increased response in the younger age groups. So that's something we're looking at. I think that's why when Paul asked about are we going into younger ages, that is a clue that perhaps an earlier intervention may potentially see increased effects, at least with the CGI that we saw, right? We have not done the sub-analyses on the genetic type, so that's something we'll do in the future. We did do genetic testing, as you know. If you did not have a molecular confirmation of Angelman syndrome, we did that testing, so that's available. We relied on the information that was provided through your clinician's office. And then we also did collect samples for biomarker work, and that will be coming out later as well. So we have a lot of great information to come, and we'll be able to share that with the community once that data is available.
And can I just ask a quick follow-up question on that? So did you see a sustained effect, or did you look at this when the individuals were off the medication after the study period? Or is this something that the individuals will need to take, every day, the once a day or dose to receive the benefit of this treatment?
We're still looking at that right now. We did see a trend from 6 weeks to 12 weeks with increasing effect in the once a day arm. So that's a trend there. Again, it's consistent with the trend in younger ages. We'll be looking at that as well. I know right now most people are off, well, everybody's completed the study, so they're not on study medication right now. If we do choose to move into ALARA, and that's an optional study, you don't have to participate, that's something that we'll also capture in terms of if there's any changes from being off the treatment and then on treatment, because it's an open label study. Also, I think there were some questions around, is it going to be as intensive as the STARS study? The ALARA study, the open label extension, will be less visits and less intense than the actual study STARS.
Amit, I just want to go back to what you said about perhaps seeing a more profound effect in the younger patient. And I just want to mention that there is every chance that it just would have maybe taken longer than the time of the study to see an effect in the older patient. And you very well may see that in the open label extension.
Absolutely valid point, Paula. I mean, I think this was a 3-month study, and the open label extensions are typically a year at least. So that is a potential that we'll definitely look at. We did see effects in both age groups, just to make sure. We did see effects in adults as well as in younger ages. It just looked like the effect was more pronounced in the younger ages from a trend perspective, but there was effects across the board.
Okay. Well, it looks like we are out of time. Amit, on behalf of the community, I would like to thank Ovid for always doing just a tremendous job in their respect for this patient population and our caregivers. We're very, very appreciative of that, and for always being accessible and available to the community to answer these types of questions. I'm sure we'll do this again soon. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you, Paula, for hosting and moderating, and to Amit and to Ovid. Again, you've done wonderful work with community, and we look forward to hearing further results of the study and to your discussions with the regulatory agencies. So thank you.
And then I'm just going to say to the community, if there's any questions that you have that we weren't able to cover in the brief period of time we had this morning, feel free to jot them down on FAST's Facebook page or the ASF's Facebook page, and we will get them over to the folks at Ovid and be able to post the answers back on our social media page to you guys. Sounds fair, Amit?
Yeah, one last thing from me then. I just want to thank you, Paula. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you to the community. We at Ovid Therapeutics are completely committed to you and the community, and we're really looking forward to working with you as we go to the next steps in finding potential therapeutic options. So stay with us. We're here for you, and please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Amit.
Thank you.